have it. Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that because of his Liberal government, when this parliament adjourns, if you are a pensioner, a weekend worker, a household with rising electricity costs or a parent of a child at a public or a Catholic school, you lose? And if you are a millionaire or a parent of a child at the elite King's College, you win. Prime Minister, how on earth is this fair?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I can confirm that as a result of the work of this government and this parliament, we have ensured that Medicare is guaranteed. We are working now in the Senate. We are working now in the Senate to ensure that Australian children get a nationally consistent, transparent, needs-based funding model, as recommended by David Gonski, as espoused, in theory at least, by the Labor Party for so many years, but never delivered. I can remind the Leader of the Opposition. He talks about rising energy prices. Well, he might well talk about his party's role in putting them where they are. His party's role. It wasn't a Liberal government that allowed so much gas to be exported from Queensland without any regard to the consequences for the domestic market. It wasn't a Liberal national government that decided to push renewable energy targets in South Australia without any regard to sustainability or storage or backup, but it is a Liberal national government. It is a coalition government that is taking action now on gas prices, that is taking action now at gas prices, that is taking action now. Which Labor never went near to stop energy companies from taking repeal or rehearing applications to decisions by the Australian Energy Regulator in respect of what they can charge for their poles and wires. And I hear the member for McMahon always posing at the dispatch box as an advocate for the workers and the consumers. But when he gets away from the microphone and his inner self comes out, we hear what he's really up to. He just said that's sovereign risk. So, sovereign
Member
risk,
for Isaacs. Member for Isaacs is warned.
So what he's
Member for McMahon. Member for McMahon will cease from objecting.
Ensuring that Australian businesses have the gas they need. It's a sovereign risk. That's right. And what about ensuring that companies that own the poles and wires are not able to game the system and charge more and more and add $6.5 billion to consumers' costs? So, and the model, the reform that the Minister for Energy has announced is one that is consistent with the way other utility sectors are treated. So it is thoroughly consistent. It removes an anomaly. It protects consumers. It protects businesses. And what does the member for McMahon say? Oh, it's a sovereign risk. It's a sovereign risk. I tell you what the biggest sovereign risk in Australia is.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? The Manager of Opposition Business will resume his seat. The member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister update the House on the importance of needs-based school funding that is fair, transparent and consistent for all students, including in my electorate of Dunkley?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I thank the member for his question, and I thank him for his commitment to ensuring that all Australian students and all Australian schools have the benefit of generous, needs-based funding, consistent, transparent, right across the country. Now, the Labor Party promised that, talked about it, but never delivered it. 27 secret deals, all inconsistent. They talk about a schools policy. They don't have a schools policy. They have a mishmash of inconsistent deals, entrenching disadvantage. The only need they answered was political need. Now, Mr Speaker, if the members opposite had the integrity and the conviction that they claim to have, they would be supporting this reform. They would be supporting this reform in the same way that David Gonski is, that Ken Baxter is, that one leading educationalist after another is around the country. Because the time has come to end all the special deals, to end the secret deals, to end the inconsistencies and have one consistent national needs-based platform for funding Australian schools. Now that's what we're delivering, and we're delivering it for the first time. This is record funding for schools, Mr Speaker. Record funding for every sector. Government, Catholic, independent, right across the board. Schools, every school in the member for Dunkley's electorate benefits from it. Over $330 million of additional funding over the next decade. And Mr Speaker, that demonstrates our commitment to the values that we espouse of ensuring that every Australian has the best chance to get ahead. And when it comes to values, Mr Speaker, and consistency, we see none from the Labor Party. We see none from the Labor Party. We saw yesterday the Labor Party's response to John Setka's extraordinary threats, where he threatened to track down inspectors of the Australian Building and Construction Commission, follow them to their homes, threaten them in the street,
Members on my right, the member for Goldstone,
threatening violence
member for
to
Bendigo,
government officials in an extraordinary way at a rally at which the Leader of the Opposition had sent a letter of support. And this to a rally that he knew his party guest, John Setka, was going to be speaking, a man with dozens of convictions, a criminal record as long as your arm, and the Leader of the Opposition backed him in. And today, will he condemn him? No. A mild sort of rap over the knuckles with a wet lettuce. That's the best he can do. He fails
the Prime Minister's time has concluded. And I call the member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday, the Prime Minister couldn't answer when asked to confirm that Fregon Anungu School will lose over $100,000 next year compared to actual funding it received in 2015. The Prime Minister later added to his answer but refused to compare funding to 2015. So I asked, what is the difference between the actual funding that Fregon Anungu School received in 2015 and what they'll get next year under this Prime Minister? They're going to get $100,000 less, aren't they?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for a question. I refer her to the answer I gave yesterday about the increase in funding from the allocated by the Commonwealth to that school. I'm sorry she was not in the House to hear it, owing to her transmissions of regular interjections being interrupted by an ejection. Mr Speaker, I've inquired of the Minister, and there has not been, I'm advised, any reduction in the amount of funding per student allocated by the Commonwealth in respect of the school at Fregon. Now, the honourable member knows that the My School site shows the amount of Commonwealth funding that a state decides to allocate to a particular school, not the amount of money the Commonwealth it determines should be given to the school or given to the state in respect to that school. So there are two, and I'm glad the honourable member's listening. There are two figures here. Firstly, the Commonwealth has to assess the needs of the school and determine the amount of funding. And we are doing that now thoroughly, transparently and consistently. If the money goes to a state government or indeed to a Catholic school system, it goes in one block. And that system, be it state or a Catholic system or indeed another system, is able to allocate it as they wish. And so the point is that the funding amount in my school is determined by the state government. It's the amount of Commonwealth funding it allocates. So I repeat, the amount of funding per student allocated by the Commonwealth per student for Fregon is increasing. It's increasing along the basis of the set out in the estimator, the state of South Australia has apparently chosen to allocate more Commonwealth funding to that school and presumably less to other schools, otherwise their total funding package wouldn't add up. So that's the answer, Mr Speaker. It's very clear. The Commonwealth's allocation of funding to that school has been consistent and growing.
The members will cease interjecting. I think that last one was the member for Mackellar. I might be doing him an injustice. No. And the member for Lawler and the member for Braddon were interjecting consistently through the answer. I warn them. And the member for Page has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Agriculture and Water Resources. Will the Deputy Prime Minister explain to the House how the government's achievements support hard-working Australians in the agricultural sector, and is the Minister aware of any threats to the sector's ongoing success?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question. And we have so much to celebrate in the agricultural sector since we have been the government, a sector which in the last GDP figures was the fastest growing sector in our nation, a sector that has grown since we have been in government for its national gross value of ag production by 29%, taking it in excess or close to $63 billion. A sector that is also standing behind the $1 million on the table for Casino Beef Week, and I know how important beef is because of the record prices we are getting and the dignity that is coming back into people's lives by record beef prices, record meat sheep prices, with record prices by reason of all the work that is done through the free trade agreements to China, to Korea, to Japan, that hard work that is being built on and delivering back to people. And it's not just that, it's the $8.4 billion that we put on the table for the inland rail to create a corridor of commerce from Melbourne up to Brisbane, through Seymour, through Wodonga, through Parkes, Narrabri, Moree, Gundawindi, Toowoomba. It's also the corridor of prosperity, a $4 billion regional investment corporation, and how important that is with $2 billion worth of infrastructure loans, decentralisation of APVMA, GRDC, Reddick, the money on the table for Dungowan Dam, for Rookwood Weir, McAllister Irrigation District, South West Loddon Pipeline, further access for chilled beef into China. But you ask what the threats are. Well, I can tell you what a threat sounds like. A threat sounds like this, and I quote John Setka. Let me give a dire warning to them ABCC inspectors. Be careful what you do. We will lob in their neighbourhood. We will go to their local footy club. We will go to the local shopping centre. They will not be able to show their faces anywhere. Their kids will be ashamed of who their parents are. Now this Mr Setka from the CFMEU has been convicted or charged of 40 separate crimes and 5 counts of assaulting police officers. And I want to commend the member for Grainler, who said, and I quote, "I find it extraordinary that any Australian would raise kids in particular. I just think the idea that people should be targeted is completely reprehensible. The comments are offensive. I completely repudiate them. I don't know the bloke." Well, you don't know the bloke, but he does. He does. He knows the bloke. He made him a guest of honour at his election night party. Why was Mr Setka there after dinner, Speaker? Entertain the kids, colour and movement with coffee and cream. I mean, this is a person who is not going to dignify the alternate Prime Minister of Australia. And you know that you should come to the dispatch box and repudiate him.
Deputy Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister,
you are standing beside
Deputy Prime Minister
Setka, and the reason he's
resume his seat. The Deputy Prime Minister will resume his seat. I've asked the Deputy Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Deputy Prime Minister will resume his seat. I now point out to the Deputy Prime Minister, I asked him on 3 or 4 occasions to resume his seat. No, and I was going to request him again to refer to members by their correct titles. The member for Sydney has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Data from the New South Wales Government confirms that Sarah Redfern Public School in Minto in south-west Sydney will lose $960,000 over the next 2 years alone. Today I spoke to the principal of Sarah Redfern High, who says these cuts will mean up to 8 fewer teaching positions, as well as reduced support for at-risk students, Indigenous students, English as a second language and gifted and talented students. How is it fair that this high school loses money while the elite King's School gets a $19 million increase?
The member for Sydney's time has concluded. The Minister for Energy and the Environment.
I can confirm to the member for Sydney that in New South Wales the government schools will receive a 4.8% increase under the Turnbull government's plan, that the Catholic schools will receive a 3.6% increase under the Turnbull government's plan, and that the independent sectors will receive a 3.8% increase under the Turnbull government's plan. And as for the Labor opposition's commitments, well, we know that the member for Sydney is talking about funny money, because this is what she had to say when she was asked on Sky about the $22 billion over the next decade. She said, well, we'll have to work out exactly what the figures are as the next election approaches. And this is what the member for Port Adelaide had to say when he was asked about the funny money. He said, it's not going to be $22 billion necessarily, Mr Speaker, so you can't take the Labor Party at their word. But what you can do is take the Turnbull government's word, and we are moving to increase school funding by $18.6 billion. We're helping more than 9,000 schools be better off, a 75% increase, and according to the member for Sydney's own electorate, we will see 40 schools, 14,000 students better off by an average of $2.5 million under the Turnbull government's plan.
Yeah. Just before I call the member for Indi, the member for Bonner will resume his seat. I'd like to acknowledge in the gallery this afternoon 5 officials from the PNG Treasury who've been on a 5-week training program with our Commonwealth Treasury. On behalf of the House, we extend a warm welcome to you. The member for Indi.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. My question is to the Foreign Minister. Foreign Minister, Papua New Guinea will hold its national election from the 24th of June to the 8th of July. And colleagues, you may be interested to know that there are 3,324 candidates, of whom 165 are women, and since independence in 1975, only 7 women have been elected to this parliament. There are 45 political parties, and I'm sure everyone would like to know that there are 2,620, or 79% of the candidates, are independent. So my question to the minister is this. Is the Australian government supporting an increase in the number of women candidates running for election? And what is being done to ensure fair and free elections for the people of Papua New Guinea?
The member of Indi's time has concluded. The Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Mr Speaker, I thank the member for Indi for her question. Papua New Guinea is our closest neighbour. In fact, only 4 kilometres separates us at our closest point, and our historic and wartime experiences have forged our very deep and close friendship. But our contemporary partnership is based on a broad and growing relationship in trade and investment, in security cooperation, people-to-people links through education and sport in particular, and our development assistance partnership with PNG is Australia's largest. Papua New Guinea is in fact a vibrant democracy, and the Australian government is responding to a request from the PNG government to assist in the preparations for their national elections, which will commence on the 24th of June. Through the Australian Electoral Commission, we are providing logistical and operational planning. We have provided training for over 30,000 PNG staff who will be required to be involved in the election. The Australian Defence Force is also providing helicopters and planes to transport personnel and deliver election materials across PNG. The member for Indi points out that the PNG government is keen to increase the number of women contesting this election, and the Australian government is supporting a range of initiatives that's not only increasing voter awareness but also increasing the opportunities for women to take part. We have in fact trained 127 potential female candidates, and as the member rightly points out, 165 women are contesting this election. We have also provided support through the Pacific Leadership and Governance Precinct, which is providing training and opportunities for enhancing leadership amongst the PNG public service, particularly women. And I am pleased to announce that not only are we supporting the PNG government through the electoral process, that a delegation of parliamentarians from the Australian Parliament will in fact be deployed to PNG to observe the elections. And I want to thank the member for Indi, the member for Bowen and Senator Claire Moore and Senator Linda Reynolds for taking part in this delegation. Mr Speaker, the Australian government's support for the PNG elections through this delegation and through other initiatives demonstrates our support for democracies in the Pacific. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of all members of this House when we wish the people of PNG all the very best for their national elections between the 24th of June and the 8th of July, and that we look forward to working with the newly elected leadership of PNG once this election has been completed.
The member for Bonner.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection. Will the minister update the House on the importance of strong and consistent border protection measures? What are the risks associated with alternative approaches?
The Minister for Immigration and Border Protection.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. It is the case, as all Australians know, that this government is absolutely resolute when it comes to border protection policies. We have taken tough decisions to make sure that we can stop the drownings at sea, to make sure that we can stop the boats, make sure we can get kids out of detention, and we've closed 17 detention centres. That's not been the case for every government, for every party in the Australian political landscape, Mr Speaker. As we know, the Labor Party, having inherited from John Howard the situation where boats had stopped, there were only 4 people in detention, they undid all of that policy. And so when we went to the last election, Mr Speaker, the reality was that Labor could only stitch up a deal by working with the unions at their national conference because, as people know, you can't get policy through the Labor Party unless it passes their conference. And so all of the unions come together and they vote for or against policy. Now, the trouble for the Leader of the Opposition is that the left and the right were divided when it came to boat policy, which of course was what resulted in 50,000 people coming on 800 boats and 1,200 people drowning at sea. So what happened, Mr Speaker, was that there was a dodgy deal stitched up at the Labor Party conference between the Leader of the Opposition, because he is the king of dodgy deals, and he worked with his friends from the CFMEU. I don't know if my colleagues can see this.
Bruce is warned.
This is talking about
the minister knows the rules.
The
on props.
left-wing union offers shortened boats lifeline. This is by Andrew Probert and Nick Butterley in the Weekend West in July of 2015. And to quote it, Mr Speaker, it says the militant left-wing construction union is expected to swing behind Bill Shorten's embrace of boat turnbacks to ensure the Labor leader is not embarrassed by an ALP revolt. So, Mr Speaker, what has happened here is that this Leader of the Opposition has tried to fool the Australian public into believing that they actually have in the Labor Party the same resolve to stop boats and to put the people smugglers out of business that we do, but we know it's not the case. Now, we have seen in the headlines of the Australian newspaper and elsewhere over the course of the last couple of days that John Setka from the Victorian branch of the CFMEU is a great friend of the Leader of the Opposition. He's a known criminal. He's a known criminal. He consorts with organised criminal figures and is a great mate of the Leader of the Opposition. He even went to the party that was the election night party of the Leader of the Opposition. What would happen, Mr Speaker, if the Leader of the Opposition became the Prime Minister at the next election? What would happen if Mr Setka was invited into the Lodge, for example? Worse still, Mr Speaker, what happened if Mr Setka didn't want to leave the Lodge? Imagine if the Prime Minister Shorten turned up with a broken arm to question time and pretended he'd slipped over at the Lodge but actually been pushed down the steps by Mr John Setka, because that's the way these people operate. And let me tell you, Leader of the Opposition, if you can sort with criminals, the Australian—
The Minister's time has concluded. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Executive Director of Catholic Education Melbourne, Mr Stephen Elder, has said that the Prime Minister continues to show, and I quote, disrespect for a sector that educates 1 in 4 students in this country. Why is the Prime Minister and every member of his government persisting with a Catholic schools policy that the Catholic education community do not want? And why is the Prime Minister making it harder for parents to choose to send their children to Catholic schools and following a policy?
The Leader of the Opposition's time has concluded. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Every contention made by the Leader of the Opposition in that question is false. The simple fact is that funding for Catholic schools is increasing in Victoria at 3.5% per annum, and it is a commitment to providing more funding, needs-based, consistently, transparently to the Catholic sector, as indeed it is on the same basis of needs to the public sector and, of course, to the independent schools. Now, Mr Speaker, as far as I want to be very clear about this, the Leader of the Opposition can do his best if he wants to sort of try and play sectarian games in the House. We won't have a bar of it. We will not have a bar of it. I want to be very clear about this. I want to be very, very clear about this.
Parramatta.
Every dollar that goes to Catholic systems goes in a block form for each state, and then it is allocated. The total sum is built up by a series of school-by-school allocations based on need, based on the SES methodology that has been used for years by governments, both coalition and Labor. So it is consistent needs-based funding, but it goes an increased sum, a substantially increased sum, goes to each Catholic system. The system in Victoria that he's speaking about is a very good example. They get a substantial increase in funding, and they are then able to distribute it and use it among their schools as they see fit. It is entirely up to them. We are transparent about how the funding is determined. The Catholic system is then able to allocate it as they see fit and presumably explain it or justify it to their parents and their communities. So that is the fact, and the contentions of fact the honourable member put to me in his question are just false.
The Leader of the Opposition seeking to table the document.
Yes, I do. I seek to table the document which quotes Mr Elder saying the continuing disrespect for a system that educates 1 in 4 students in the country.
The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. Leave is not granted. Just before I call the member for Fairfax, I'd also like to inform the House we have joining us in the gallery today a delegation of members from the Parliament of India. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome to you. The member for Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and my question is to the Minister for Defence Industry, representing the Minister for Employment. What action is the government taking against officials of registered organisations who routinely break the law? Is the minister aware of any alternative approach?
The Minister for Defence Industry.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Fairfax for his question. Mr Speaker, this morning we witnessed one of those legendary train wreck interviews on Sky Television between Tom Connell and the member for Watson, who is busily trying to look like he has many other things that are concerning him than listening to this answer to this question. We watched a train wreck interview between Tom Connell on Sky Television and the member for Watson about the bugbear which is the CFMEU, which the Labor Party cannot shake as long as the CFMEU is part of the inner circle of the Leader of the Opposition's advisers and funders. Because the member for Watson was asked 8 times, 8 different opportunities about whether John Setka was fit to lead the CFMEU. Finally, Tom Connell said, "Would you be pleased if the members decided that John Setka's leadership had had enough?" And the member for Watson says, "I'm not going to tell the members of the union what to do." No. The member for Watson, Mr. Speaker.
Members on my right. The member for Barker.
What to do, but he's very happy for the union to tell the Labor Party what to do. He's very happy to let the CFMEU tell the Leader of the Opposition what to do. He's very happy for the CFMEU to give $3 million of funding to the Labor Party since this Leader of the Opposition held that office, to be part of the pre-selections of candidates for this House and the State Parliament, to be part of the policy-making process, to get the Labor Party to do the bidding of the CFMEU, led by a man who routinely breaks the law, has been convicted and charged of at least 40 different offences over the course of the last few years, the latest one of which was blackmail, who is an honoured guest at the Leader of the Opposition's election night party, an honoured guest. He won't do the right thing, not like Bob Hawke and John Cain did in Victoria when they deregistered the BLF and disaffiliated from that union, when John Secker worked for the BLF, when he was a young official with the BLF and then folded into the CFMEU. Bob Hawke was a real leader of the Labor Party. This fellow who's leading you all to be involved with an organisation led by a man with a criminal past who says it's OK to defy the law. It's OK to routinely defy the law. And as the Minister of Immigration has said in the past, happy to pay the fines, couldn't care less. The action this government, this opposition needs to take is to disaffiliate the CFMEU from the Labor Party. Stop taking their money. And we will introduce in the spring session a bill to ban officials from registered organisations who routinely break the law from holding office in a registered organisation. We will introduce that bill in the spring session, and we expect the Leader of the Opposition to support it, or will he again confirm that he is weak
The Minister's
and soft
time has
on
concluded. Members on my right, the member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister today guarantee that no parent will have to pay more to send their child to a Catholic school because of the Prime Minister's schools policy?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member knows full well, the funding going to the Catholic system is increasing substantially. There is more money going to Catholic school systems. That is the fact. How the Catholic school systems manage their fees or allocate the money they are given by the Commonwealth is a matter for them. What we do is transparently and consistently set out how the needs-based funding is determined. The Australian government, determines the needs of each school, allocates money appropriately. How the Catholic administrators determine fees is a matter for them and them alone.
The member for Swan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline to the House how the government is responsibly delivering on policies to ensure better days ahead for Australian families and businesses, including in my electorate of Swan? Is the Treasurer aware of any alternative approaches?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for Swan for his question and his passion for ensuring that Australians are getting the good government that they deserve from the Turnbull government, which is delivering on the better days that are ahead and the hundreds of thousands of extra jobs that have been created over the last 12 months, particularly the some 110,000 extra full-time jobs in the last quarter alone, Mr. Speaker, also benefiting his electorate of Swan. The Turnbull government has been getting on with the job. Over the past year, Mr. Speaker, we have legislated to reduce the tax burden and small and medium-sized enterprises, Mr. Speaker. We have reduced the tax burden, particularly on small businesses, by increasing the threshold from $2 million to $10 million, and we have legislated to extend the instant asset write-off for those small businesses up to $10 million for a further 12 months. We have introduced and legislated a tax on the major banks in this country, Mr. Speaker, which will ensure that they are also contributing additionally to the task of providing the many important services and guaranteeing those services that Australians rely on around the country. We have legislated to provide extra support for pensioners over the course of this fortnight alone. We have lifted the Medicare threshold, Mr Speaker, for low-income earners to ensure that their needs are respected. We have legislated to introduce the Medicare Guarantee Fund that guarantees Medicare and the funding for Medicare all around the country, and the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme. We have legislated to restore the pensioners' concession card to some 90,000 Australians, Mr Speaker, and we have legislated to prevent tax fraud, Mr Speaker. We have legislated to prevent tax fraud in the precious metals industry, including the Goldfinger rorts that were being undertaken by members of the Labor Party, including those who are on the Senate ticket for the last election that was put forward and supported and adopted by the Leader of the Opposition. I'm asked about alternative approaches, Mr Speaker. In the last 12 months, this is what the Leader of the Opposition and the Labor Party have done. They have put unions before young unemployed people by opposing our program, the PATH program, to get young unemployed people into jobs. They have put unions above the interest, Mr Speaker, of owner truck drivers. They have put unions ahead of students by opposing our reforms to put real needs-based funding in place, Mr Speaker, which will see more money flow to those students. And we know that they put unions ahead of the rule of law and order in the building and construction industry, which is necessary, Mr Speaker, to grow our construction industry and ensure that the $75 billion of extra funding that is going into infrastructure projects around the country in particular will be well spent and not wasted on the union rorts, which the Leader of the Opposition endorses by having John Setka come to his election party.
The Treasurer's time has concluded. The member for Lingiari has
Thank
the
you,
floor.
Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm his hit list of 300 schools which he claims is overfunded is still secret, and that this list includes some of the most disadvantaged schools in the country, including 150 public schools in Lingiari, and he's keeping government data on his cuts to schools hidden, including from members of his own government? Prime Minister, how do you expect senators and members to vote on your cuts to schools when you're refusing to be upfront about their full impact on the future of our children?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The only hit list that honourable members opposite should be concerned about is John Setka's hit list, and that includes hard-working public servants, and that is the hit list that the Labor Party is defending. That is the hit list and the conduct that the Labor Party is defending. The desperate efforts of the Labor Party to mislead and deceive Australians about the nature of our education reforms is extraordinary. The honourable member can wave his arms around as much as he likes, but he can't.
The member for Burt will cease interjecting. The member for Burt is warned.
Their hypocrisy, the failure to have one single needs-based
Member for Burt will leave under
education
94A. Member for Burt will leave under 94A. Prime
Thank you,
Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker. I say to the honourable member, he knows as well as I do, as well as every member of this House does, that schools in his electorate are going to be massively better off as a result of this. There is more funding right across the nation, and it's needs-based, and he has many schools in his electorate which have very high needs. They're getting additional funding under my government, under this program. It's a commitment. It's needs-based.
The member
and
for
the Labor
Lingiari.
Party can quote phony figures as much as they like. They can quote their fantasy figures they never paid for as much as they like. But Australians know we are committed to deliver
The member for
needs-based
Lingiari is warned.
funding model that David Gonski recommended, that Labor claimed to respect and then betrayed. What was their policy described as by Ken Boston? A corruption of the Gonski model. Strong language, but very apt. Labor failed the children of Australia. We are delivering for them.
The member for Barara.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Justice and the Minister assisting the Prime Minister for counter-terrorism. Will the Minister update the House on what the government's commitment to our law enforcement agencies, and are there any threats to the integrity of our law enforcement?
The Minister for Justice.
3.2 million better off.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Barara for that question. and I was very pleased to update the House yesterday about a $321 million investment in the capability of the Australian Federal Police in last year's budget. And that reminds us that no government is committed to the support of the Australian Federal Police like this one. But from the other side, we've heard about the vicious attack by the Secretary of the CFMEU in Victoria, John Setka, on the hard-working men and women of the Australian Federal Police. And we also heard the shocking comments that he made about his intention to track down, expose and intimidate public servants. Now, I'm pleased to advise the House that the Australian Federal Police has received a referral from Minister Cash in relation to this matter, and they are currently evaluating it for criminal charges. Unfortunately, this is only the latest example of the culture of lawlessness that we see within the CFMEU, and I could give the House a list of examples. The official who walked into the Gold Coast site and threatened workers there by saying, "I know your phone number, I know where you live." The CFMEU member who threatened to gang rape one of our workplace inspectors. The reality is,
members on my right, the member for Goldstein,
have all the attributes
the member
of
for
an
Barker
organised
is
crime
warned.
gang, and they've got the criminal associates and the rap
The member
sheets
for
that go along
Brand
with
is
that.
warned.
Now, the real question is, why does the CFMEU still have so much influence over the Australian Labor Party? Why does John Setka still vote at the Australian Labor Party's national conference? Why does this Leader of the Opposition sit there in the face of all this evidence and do absolutely nothing? Now, the answer is that this Leader of the Opposition is completely owned by this guy. He is completely owned by this guy. The CFMEU is the most powerful organisation within the Victorian Labor Party machine. Just last month, we saw a senior Labor source briefing The Australian. The CFMEU has taken over the branch, and everyone is too scared to do anything about it. Over the last decade, the CFMEU has donated $8.7 million to the Australian Labor Party. And the Leader of the Opposition's leadership is dependent on the factional alliance that he has with the CFMEU. Now, Mr. Speaker, what will it take for this Leader of the Opposition to actually do something to stop the CFMEU from influencing his political party? What will it take for him to stop taking their money? How much evidence of lawlessness, how many crimes committed will it take for you to take action?
The minister's time has concluded. The member for McEwen has already been warned. The member for Lindsay will cease interjecting. The Leader of the Opposition has the call.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Isn't it now clear that because of this government's policies, when the parliament adjourns, millionaires will win? Parents with children in a King's school will win, but pensioners will lose. People with rising electricity prices will lose. Weekend workers will lose. Children at public and Catholic schools will lose. Why does this Prime Minister only ever look after the big end of town and punish everybody else?
The Minister for Transport and Infrastructure will cease interjecting, and the Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the honourable member poses now as the champion of the workers, the same workers that he sold down the river, trading away their penalty rates when he was a union official, the same workers who are threatened with violence by the CFMEU, by John Setka, a union official that he depends on for his leadership and whom he will not condemn. He doesn't even have the courage to say that he should be sacked as an official of the CFMEU, any more than that hero from Watson was prepared to do. Oh, it's a matter for the union. I mean, after all, how much do you have to threaten people with to actually get slammed by the member for Watson or the Leader of the Opposition. I mean, let's be quite clear. What John Setka threatened to do was take thugs from his union and follow hard-working public servants around, follow them home, threaten them with violence, threaten them in front of their children, threaten them at their clubs, and you would think that a Labor Party that cared about the rule of law, that cared about Australian values, would call for him to be sacked. You'd think they would. And what have they done? Nothing.
Members on
Nothing
my
at
left.
all. No denunciation at all.
Prime Minister will resume his seat. Prime Minister will resume his seat. Now, the Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Leader of the House, Prime Minister will resume his seat for a second. The Minister for Energy and the Environment will cease interjecting and is warned. The member for Braddon's already been warned and will leave under 94A. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we have seen nothing but the limpest of response from the Leader of the Opposition and the member for Watson. Where is the champion of the law, the member for Isaacs? Has he been out there calling for action? Where has he been out there? They have done nothing. No, done nothing to stand up for the rule of law. Mr. Speaker,
Prime Minister will resume his seat. I think those interjecting are missing the point. I just simply refer members to my statements earlier in the week. This might be the last question time for a while, but if members insist on disrupting the chamber, engaging in disorderly debate, they will be throwing themselves out, and there might only be about 10 or 15 minutes to go, but I am not working on a quota. The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr. Speaker, we've seen at a public rally organised by the head of the largest single financial backer of the Labor Party, a union that delivered the leadership of the Labor Party to the member for Maribyrnong, we've seen a criminal, John Setka, with a record of dozens of convictions, stand up and threaten with violence, threaten to track and harass and bully and menace officials of the Commonwealth Government working for the Australian Building Construction Commission. And what is the Leader of the Opposition's response to that? Oh, a rather limp dissociation without any conviction. But the real message he sends, Mr. Speaker, is he doesn't believe the CFMEU is breaking the law. He doesn't believe the CFMEU is a threat to the law. He wants to abolish the ABCC. He wants to once again put those thugs above the law. That's where he has failed.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. The member for Robertson has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment. Will the minister outline to the House why the rule of law is vital in maintaining a stable flow of investment across Australia? Is the minister aware of any risks to this investment that would threaten the jobs of hard-working Australians? Good question.
The Minister for Trade and Investment, the member for Rankin, the member for Perth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for a question, because on this side of the House we are very aware of the importance of investment flowing into the Australian economy. We know the fundamental link between investment in the Australian economy and the ability to drive economic growth and to drive jobs. That's why, as the Coalition, we are so committed to making sure that there can be confidence in the rule of law in the Australian economy and the Australian political system. In fact, in 2016, the report on the Index of Economic Freedom ranked Australia currently 5th overall in world rankings and noted, and I quote, "Strong rule of law protects property rights and helps to minimise corruption." Now, that would seem like a very worthwhile goal. That would seem like a goal that would be fundamental to ensuring continued economic growth and fundamental to ensuring that we have the opportunity for Australians to be able to secure employment. But the problem, Mr Speaker, is this, and it goes to the members' questions. There are threats to the rule of law in Australia. In fact, the threats to the rule of law in Australia comes directly from the culture of those opposite. And in particular, we see the greatest threat come from those that are involved in the militant CFMEU. In particular,
Minister, resume his seat for a second. Well, member for Rankin's the last man talking, so he can leave under 94A. The minister has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. As I was saying, the problem is that we have seen an absolute culture in the Australian Union movement, which was epitomised by the ACTU Sally McManus when she said, and I quote, "I don't think there's a problem with breaking it in relation to Australian laws." If that's the permeating culture in the Australian Union movement, then what chance do we have? But it's not just Sally McManus. It's more than that, because it's more endemic. Just this week, we saw the Australian Manufacturers Workers Union of New South Wales Secretary Tim Ayres said, and this is what he said, "Sally McManus was right, comrades. We're not going to be cowed into submission by expletive laws." That's another example of the culture in the CFMEU. And the thing is, the Leader of the Opposition knows about this culture. When they talk about toxic donations, we're not talking about foreign entities that are making toxic donations. We're talking about the CFMEU. We're talking about the fact, for example, that they are taking money, the member for Griffith, the member for Werriwa, the member for Shortland, the member for Caldwell, all of them affiliated with the CFMEU, all of them prepared to turn a blind eye as they go about threatening children, as they go about threatening ordinary Australians, and as they are prepared to trash the principle of rule of law, because the Australian Labor Party is suckling on the teat of the CFMEU, and they will keep taking that cash and remaining silent until such time as we can put in place the strong laws like the ABCC.
Touchy bill. Touchy bill.
The member for McMahon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Under this Prime Minister and this Liberal government, millionaires get a tax cut in just 9 days' time. But on the exact same day, ordinary workers will get a pay cut. Prime Minister, how exactly is that fair?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, that question came from a man who wrote a book claiming that there should be a 25% company tax rate in Australia. He did. He was so convicted of this, he wrote a book and he said that the best way to get wages up was to lower business taxes. He said it'll deliver investment, and that will result in more employment and high wages. And he's going to autograph me one. I'm sure he's got plenty of unsold copies lying around, Mr Speaker. But nonetheless, that was his conviction. And that's what we're doing. We're reducing company tax. This current financial year, businesses are up to $10 million turnover, paying 2.5% less company tax. Next year it goes up to more medium-sized businesses, up to $25 million a year. We know, they know, that will result in more investment and more jobs. And at the same time, we're doing what Labor was never prepared to do, and we're cracking down on multinational tax avoidance. The Labor Party, for reasons they have not explained, actually voted against the multinational tax avoidance measures. They voted against them. Fortunately, we were able to get them carried in the Senate, notwithstanding. And of course, the diverted profits tax comes into operation, one of the toughest international tax avoidance countermeasures in the OECD. It is an absolute cutting-edge measure, one of the toughest, described as very harsh. in some quarters, Mr Speaker, but we make no apologies. We're committed to ensuring that everybody pays the tax that they're due. Now, as to the deficit levy, it is not being abolished. It's expiring in accordance with its terms, in accordance with the terms the Labor Party voted for. They can't have it two ways. First, they condemned it as a deceit tax. They denounced it. They said it's outrageous. Terrible idea. Then they voted for it on the basis it was only for 3 years. The 3 years are coming to an end. We have delivered tax cuts to middle-income earners. 500,000 won't go into the second highest tax bracket. Thanks to our efforts, we're delivering tax cuts to business so they will, as the member for McMahon said, invest and employ, driving higher wages. We're backing business, we're backing jobs. Labor's trying to run a most unconvincing politics of envy campaign. They're not persuading anyone that they're other than frauds on the economy and on jobs.
The member for Latrobe.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. I refer the Minister to the government's $75 billion infrastructure investment. Will the Minister update the House how this investment is creating jobs in my home state of Victoria? What are the threats to the delivery of key infrastructure projects?
The Minister for Transport and Investment.
Well, we'll see how it goes.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. And I thank the member for Latrobe for his question. He's always on the side of his community. He's a tireless worker for better infrastructure in his community, particularly projects like the Monash Freeway upgrade. And the Turnbull-Joyce government is delivering for infrastructure in Victoria. We're planning to reduce congestion, to improve productivity and also to save lives on our roads. We saw that last year with a $3 billion deal we announced with Victoria in the package, which will include $1 billion for the Monash Freeway. A package will include $690 million for rural and regional roads. It's been welcomed in the seat of Corangamite, the seat of Wannon, McMillan, Murray, Flinders, right across Victoria, in fact. And this year we announced another $500 million under our regional rail package. We're looking to do more. We're looking to do more longer-term projects in Victoria. But, Mr Speaker, in our efforts we want to build more infrastructure and to help create more jobs and deliver more value for money for Australians, we're being blocked. We're being blocked by the Labor Party and the unions. They're standing in our way. Now, the member for Latrobe asked about threats. He asked about threats to the delivery of infrastructure projects here in Australia, and there is a big threat. There is a big threat. We've heard about today. It's called the Construction Division of the CFMEU. It's called John Setka. Speaking at a rally this week, John Setka said, and I quote, "People might have to wait longer than they think. People might have to wait longer than they think for infrastructure projects in Victoria." No, member for Grainler, your party's got to get better than this. Don't talk to me about better than this. Your party's got to get better than this. The Productivity Commission report into public infrastructure in 2014 found, and I quote, "A prominent concern is that union employer behaviour is not only fuelling unlawful conduct but also frustrating productivity and raising costs." And I said earlier, the member for Latrobe knows whose side he's on. The member for Latrobe knows whose side he's on. He's on the side of Australian taxpayers. He's on the side of the Australian taxpayers who want value for money for infrastructure projects. Now, Leader of the Opposition can't stay on the side of this union thug who said this week, and again I quote, this is a quote from John Setka this week, "Let me give a dire warning to the ABCC inspectors, be careful what you do. We will lobby their neighbourhoods. We will tell them who lives in that house. They will not be able to show their faces anywhere. Their kids will be ashamed of who their parents are. Their kids will be ashamed of who their parents are." Mr Speaker, decent Australians are disgusted and they're revolted by these bullying tactics, and we are on their side.
Member for McKellar and the member for Rice.
We are on their side. John Setka and the CFMEU Construction Division make Norm Gallagher and the BLF look like a bunch of choir boys. Now, Bob Hawke actually deregistered the BLF. This Leader of the Labor Party continues to accept CFMEU money in the form of political donations. John Setka has gone too far, and those opposite know that. The member for Grainler supported the police being called in to investigate John Setka's comments, but the current Leader of the Opposition has only disassociated himself from the remarks. It's not good enough to stuff them with the wet lettuce, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition needs to abandon all ties with the CFMEU and stop accepting their donations.
The Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
I thank the Prime Minister.